Now it's my pleasure to introduce Harvey Seale. Harvey is Group L&D Manager at Nuffield Health, and the title is very much the Infrastructure for Effective Learning at Work. So, Harvey, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm aware that I'm the guy that stands between you and lunch, so over the next 20 concise minutes or so, I'll be talking about risk management learning. It's worth noting at this point that I've already locked the door, so if you're now thinking that perhaps you'll go and view something else, I'm afraid you've missed your opportunity. Just make yourselves comfy. I'm responsible for the risk learning of around 15,000 people spread over 250 sites. Those sites include hospitals, gyms, sterilization units, something to do with birth control, and physiotherapy clinics. And what I'm going to talk to you about is, over the next couple of slides or so, the opportunity that you have to revisit this part of your ever-expanding, this risk management learning that seems to take an ever-expanding part of your L&D budget that's shrinking year on year, or at least has stayed flat for the last, well, certainly since 2008. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look to give you some tools so that you can look to make this learning more effective, cheaper, and by doing so, raise your profile with senior individuals in the organization. So why do we need it? Well, some of it is legally required. Health and safety, manual handling, display screen equipment. These things are required by law. But I'm sure you'll all know there's actually a hell of a lot of other stuff there that isn't required by your regulators and isn't legally required that you need to provide when someone starts with your organization. And this is the key reason why it's there. Your executives want it there. Somewhere in your organization, a senior person, a CEO, someone that sits on the board, will have a legal entity title of registered manager or accountable officer. Now what this means is that if something very bad happens in your organization, particularly involving money or people, those individuals, the registered managers and the accountable officers, will find themselves in court, fined, and possibly in jail. So the kinds of things they're worried about are these kinds of things. I've got some stats there on the screen. Just look at that one on the bottom there. Last year, the Information Commissioner's Office got some new powers, and they immediately started using them. Now, the Information Commissioner's Office is the organization, the legal entity that's responsible for protecting your private data within organizations that use it. Now, that £130,000 fine was for someone sending one fax to the wrong number. All right? Now, that doesn't even include legal fees. This year, the Information Commissioner's Office has yet more powers. And it can fine an organization up to 5% of its turnover. All right? Similar kind of thing. This is what's focusing the senior people in your organization. And training is a key risk control for avoiding these kinds of things. They either mitigate the fine if you can demonstrate, you put systems in place, and you have taken risk management seriously, and you can prove that you have been training your employees in that particular risk area. All right? So how could you use this to your advantage? Well, throughout the conference, you'll be hearing phrases from other speakers along the lines of, you must get closer to your executive board. You must demonstrate that you're a business partner. You must demonstrate that L&D adds business value. Thereby, they'll start to take you more seriously. Well, one of the easiest ways in which you can do that is visit again the risk management learning that's within your remit and make it cheaper and make it more effective. Show that you feel their pain as far as these things that are keeping your executives awake at night. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, through the rest of the presentation, look at 3 key areas. This is the RASP model. It's a reasonably common way of expressing how risk is organized and how risk management process in your organization works. You'll have one of these. Now, if this is the first time you've seen this, my advice to you is if you want to adopt some of the things that I'm talking about, is to go back to your organization and find out where these 3 areas are. Just to give you a quick 10-cent tour. The RISC architecture is how risk is communicated around the business. So that's how the risk appetite of the board and their expectations about the things that frighten them, and we just talked about that already, is conveyed down the organization to the factory floor, and how risks that are emerging, activities, business activities that is taking place, and indeed how compliant their employees are, goes back up. That's a risk architecture. That's how the risk is communicated around the business. Risk strategy is all about the policies, the documents that police that risk management process. And the risk protocols is how that's implemented. Now, obviously, there are a lot of those, but for this discussion, I'm just going to focus on your learning management system and your e-learning. Now, believe it or not, this is a simplified risk architecture map. This is how clinical risk is sent around the organization. And again, you will have one of these in your organization, but you might not have that. You see that there? That one in the middle there. It's the GTF, or the Group Training Forum. Now, I've set one of these up in a number of organizations, and I chair that at Nuffield. And what it is a group of people from across the business, from the factory floor, middle managers, frontline leaders, senior people, and they meet once a quarter, and they discuss risk in a training context. They look at how compliant the organization is. They act as a gatekeeper to the LMS, because one of the dangers is if you have a free-for-all approach to your learning management system where anybody can upload to it, you run the risk of having inaccurate, or at the very least, very poor content making its way onto your learning management system. This body of individuals is a governance structure that will act as a gatekeeper to that. And they'll generate a report, making recommendations. Now, mine just does risk, but yours can include other L&D activities. You've already got these people together against this training that they must do, and then you can use it to try out other ideas around your L&D initiatives that you may want to try out in the coming year. That gives you hard data during your budget negotiations. Now, you'll notice that I've skipped over the S bit, that's the strategic bit. That's because those policies are going to be special to you. All I'm going to say on that regard is look at your L&D policies, look at that area that deals with risk management learning, and in that area you will need to ensure that the policy talks about what risks you're addressing, what training you're going to be doing, who is going to be the recipient of that training, and most important of all, most important fact is that you demonstrate how you're monitoring compliance. If someone comes in, if there's a breach, if someone leaves a data bar with sensitive information from your organization on a train, and in order to pay a visit to your organization, they'll go to your policy, they'll read what's in your policy, and then they'll go into the organization and see if you're doing that there. Just make sure that's all lined up. The rest of it deals, so the protocol part, which is the next part of my presentation, which deals with how you can start looking at ways in which you can organize your learning management system, and how you can start to either rein in and standardize the e-learning that you currently have on it around risk management, or try doing it yourself. And I'm going to talk some ideas there for you to try. I'll talk more about those components individually in a moment. First port of call is how the content is organised on your learning management system. If you've got all your content thrown in the same folder, in the same catalogue, it's a nightmare to find anything. So most people are probably not going to go around and look for content and training unless they're told exactly where it is. Now, one idea is to divide your content into 3 areas. So there is discovery here, 0 to 6 month service. This contains nothing but RISC learning. That's it. Mandatory training, RISC learning, that's all that's in there. All right. I've got connect, 6 months to 2 years in this instance. That's your middle management, interview training, that kind of stuff that's in there. And then we've got the premium stuff in the realize element. And the realize catalogue contains the premium stuff for the, to reward loyal employees. It's got external training in there and that kind of thing. Okay. It also makes a simple, transparent way in which your employee, without any prompting, can go onto your learning management system and be walked through the development path that no doubt you spent a long time building. And that's represented that path online. Now, there is actually a lot behind this. My presentation will contain a transcript of what I'm talking about and some how-to tips to get started with your LMS. I'm not going to go into those now, okay? But for those of you who want my presentation, that is, I'll have that extra detail on it. One of the biggest issues that most people have with risk management learning is this fluffy administrative cloud of stuff that goes around it. Making sure you've got the right content. Is it up to date? Identifying the right people. Not everyone gets the same learning. Adding, making sure they enroll in it. Chasing them. Chasing their line manager. Have they done their annual refresher? There's lots of stuff there, and actually your learning management system can do all of that. All right? So one idea, which I've used for the last 6 years in 3 organizations, is to organize and this is just RISC, but you can do this with all of your learning, is to organize your modules into groups or tiers, as I've got there. Your learning management system will have an ability to group together modules into little packets, and then you can administer those packets in one go. All right? There's also a range of automation around that, so that when you add a person to your learning management system, the LMS can read that fields in that user account and then add that block of learning to that person's profile. So, Tier 1, everybody does that training, fire safety, health and safety, that kind of stuff. Tier 2 is divisional additions, so you'll have as many packets as you have divisions there. That's as an addition to Tier 1. Tier 3 is additional training to Tier 1 and Tier 2 for the specialism of the individual. And Tier 4 is any extra stuff on top of Tier 1, 2 and 3 that the individual needs for their location. So for example, if a nurse joins the organisation, a nurse will need about 22, at the basic level, 22 different types of compliance learning, and he or she will need to do that every year. So when she joins the organisation, the user account is created, the LMS looks at that, assigns packet 1 in Tier 2, assigns the hospital packet from Tier 2, assigns the nurse packet from Tier 3, and anything from Tier 4. In this case, let's say she works at Leeds and she's going to be doing bariatrics, that's weight management surgery. So that's extra stuff there that Leeds Hospital specialises in. Now, as far as the nurse is concerned, they log in and all their learning is listed for them and they just do it. They haven't got to find it. For those of you who have tried to get a hold of the compliance or improve your compliance in your organisation, you'll know that the biggest thing that the people come back to is, well, I didn't know what I was meant to do. I can find it. Well, get your LMS to enforce it and put that on the learning profile. Okay? Just a quick look into the people bit around this. The 0 to 28 day point, have your LMS handle that initial chasing. Your LMS will have an email bit that will alert the individual if they haven't completed it. Use it. An advantage would be, a suggestion would be, that at the 14-day point, have it check the completion status of the packets, and if they haven't been completed, email them. And not just them, involve their line manager. And if your LMS allows it, repeat every week until the 28-day point, and if your LMS allows that, different type of message. Once a month at the 28-day point, convene a governance body that pulls down compliance learning and compiles that into a league table. You probably already meet from an L&D perspective once a month. You might even create a report. Add more business value to that by putting risk-based data in it. More people will read it, and again, you're showing that actually it's not just this bit I'm doing. I'm interested in influencing this part of the business that I know you're worried about. So just to quickly walk through some of the content pieces, whether you're procuring your e-learning or whether you're building it yourself, your first port of call before you design anything is HR and IT. Find out what technical infrastructure do you have, and the spread of the individuals you have in your organization. If it's an older demographic, you may need to consider larger text. You may need to consider different types of descriptions inside your modules. You'll know better than I do, but the first port of call is to understand what that looks like. If you've got really old computers that haven't been changed for 20 years, there's no point creating e-learning content with lots of sound and streaming video. Another way you can use the GTF is to have it act like a gatekeeper to the learning management system. I've talked about this at the moment. This is a suggested process. If you're interested, let me know afterwards, and I can give you kind of a template of how that process could look if you wanted to implement a gatekeeping process for your e-learning content. This is a suggested structure for what your e-learning content should look like, and actually it doesn't have to be this. I do recommend you have an assessment at the end, because that really does give your compliance data real power and punch to say that, there's 80% pass rate, 95% of the organization have gone through this and passed that. That just means that they have understood the content. Now, it doesn't matter what structure you use, but do pick a structure and then stick to it. Nothing puts someone off quicker than that nurse, for example, has to do 23 pieces of e-learning. If she has to learn 23 different ways of navigating around a module, then that's going to be an inhibitor to getting on and getting that compliance learning done. Now, all of the content that you see on the screen here, I did. I'm not a particularly technical person, with PowerPoint and Adobe Captivate. Adobe Captivate is an authoring program, and it makes e-learning. It's about £500, and it works pretty much like PowerPoint. And if you ever thought to yourself, I'm not really the technical expertise to make my own e-learning, have a look at a trial of that. It's amazing. And even if you just create half of your content or your renewals, that's going to save a considerable amount of money. That's something else you can be talking about at L&D budget time. And that's the kind of information you can present to senior people. It's very simple. PowerPoint presentation with all animations. Captivate imports all of that, so you can make it look really good and a nice bit of impact in PowerPoint. My advice was to get an iStock photo account. Some of you may know what that is. It's just a way. It's an online portal where you can download videos, animations, high professional photos. They're royalty free for as little as 99p, and you can make the presentations look really professional. Pass that through your GTF, so there's a gatekeeping process there, so that it sits in the same process. Pop it through Captivate. 20 minutes later, you've got a module you can upload to your LMS. All right? Just try that.
Oh, we're getting a little tight for time.
Yeah, I've got 2 minutes. Thanks, Alan. So the final part I want to talk about is management information. The key thing here is that your LMS will provide learning. The thing is, learning data. The thing is, it's going to be typically in a raw form, huge amounts of it. Consider who's going to want to see that information, and I would include the board with the compliance information. They're going to want to see that. And if no one's doing it right now, that's another brownie point for you. Put it into a pivot table. Summarize that information. Here's an example of one I made earlier. This is actually a divisional pivot table. Actually has a TNA analysis along there. Can you see my tiers here and the matrix of what's required? These are all little packets on the LMS, and they're all assigned automatically. And then this is just copied from the LMS and popped in here. There's a slide here on the next step, but I want to make it to the last slide. These are things to consider once you start getting your sea legs with Captivate. Okay, so the final thing I want to just touch on is this summary slide, which is basically in your business, create a risk and LMS governing body, if you haven't got one already, and by all means use L&D activities with that as well. On your LMS, automate administrative tasks and create management information. Again, use a pivot table to help summarize and make that data portable. And in the boardroom, track compliance, trend it over locations, very easy to do, and present the savings, which will be substantial if you start creating your own e-learning, and publish an annual training report indicating risks in the business. Such and such left a data bar on the train in May. We've looked at that. We've looked at the offering. This is what we're doing about it. Now, if no one's doing those kinds of things and reporting those kinds of things through a new structure, good quality risk management data will be read at board level every month, and your name should be all over it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harvey. I have to tell you that during that presentation, I was having a crisis of conscience. The very first sort of encounter I had with risk management was to write an article for IT Training magazine. And I finished my article by saying that risk management was the domain of the paranoid. So thank you for proving me wrong. And some great opportunities here for some questions. And Charles.
Thank you. Thanks, Harvey. I've got a sort of fundamental question, I guess. You put a couple of examples of the impact of risk up there. I think there'd be a good argument for that second one about someone sending a fax inadvertently to somewhere else. That the only way that someone could learn not to do that would be probably by doing it incorrectly once, and that person would never do it again.
Yeah.
So the question I've got, you didn't talk about impact at all, and is there any evidence whether and how risk training changes behaviour? And and the second bit of the question is, if so, if there is evidence around that, is there any evidence around the frequency and amount of compliance training, whether there's a fade-off? You talked about, I think, nurses requiring 22 compliance, going through training 22 compliance programs every year and then repeating them. I'm just interested in terms of the impact, because I think a lot of risk training, I think it's valid because as you said, it keeps CEOs out of prison. But what about the validity in terms of the impact of changing behaviour?
Well, that's a big question. Yes, okay, I guess what you're saying is, if someone takes an information governance module and it talks about all the things they should be doing, ringing ahead, safe haven, confidentially destroying that information after they've faxed it, and they answer that question correctly. It doesn't mean the behaviour's changed. No, it doesn't. It doesn't, because ultimately, but that's one part of the puzzle. You've got your compliance training starts that process, and what we have at the minute, which was the thrust of the presentation, was that one of the first things the Information Commissioner's Office will look at when they come into an organisation is whether your policies talk about how you're delivering this learning, and whether you have bothered to ensure that, first of all, everyone's been exposed to the information, and whether or not you're keeping a track of who's been exposed to the information. As far as changing behaviours, that's a big thing. There's a number of things that we do along those lines. We have talked about balanced scorecards. So, for example, we look at, for RISC, there is a lot of data that exists in the organisation. For us, we use Datix, and that's an incident logging system that looks at serious incidents, breaches, those kinds of things. Along with customer surveys and those kinds of things. We look at that data, and we have an expectation that we don't want to see this vary out of a certain point. For example, we don't want breaches to go out from a certain point. We want to reduce serious incidents, say, by 15%. Those metrics form part of a balanced scorecard that go into our information governance meetings. You saw it on that green 28-day point. We have information integrated governance meetings at every location. Job aids is another way in which we do that. Little wobbly things on the faxes and on the bins that people have to go through in order to throw things away. And incentives. We have, obviously, if someone does fax something to the wrong place, there is a disciplinary process for that. Everyone's aware of that. And in our organisation, it's very clear there are consequences. You're still going to get a percentage of people that ultimately take the learning, see the behaviours they should be adopting, and don't adopt them regardless of what we do. I guess the point I'm making is that if that happens, and risks do materialise in an organisation with the best will in the world, if you can demonstrate that you have not only just put the compliance learning in and left it at that, but you've proactively monitored how that learning is going through into the organisation with some of those things I was talking about a moment ago, then...
Sorry, but do you demonstrate, or do you have evidence of causality? That's the question. Do you know that the training... I mean, most people want to do a good job. I believe that most people in their work will try to do the best they can. But that's a different issue to whether risk training actually changes behaviour. Right. And if it does, is there a fall off because people are so dated with or not? I mean, is there any data around that causal link? That really was a question. Do you have any data? Or is it really around a process in terms of following the guidelines so that when the inspectors come in, you can demonstrate the fact that you've gone through a process? Or are you looking at outputs? That's really the question I was asking.
Yeah, okay. Put basically, the compliance learning is the first part of it. You can put systems and processes that you monitor in the organisation. Can you create a direct causal link between a behavioural change in the organisation and what you do in the form of compliance learning? No, it's a difficult thing to do.
Well then, sorry, if I could just one last comment. Then the obvious solution should be to do it as quickly, just as much. It's a little like paying a tax. You don't want to just pay enough to be legal, to make sure that keep everyone out of prison and that there's no fines, and you don't do any more, and therefore you put the process in place to do that. And I would challenge whether putting in very complex processes is the answer to do that. That was my thinking.
All right, thank you.
Can I just comment to that? I understand what you're saying, but I can say from experience in the organization I work for in North America with our anti-money laundering, we train people on anti-money laundering every year, and we had significant issues on anti-money laundering because of that tick in the box kind of thing. And what I think is really required in this kind of training is to really help people understand how to apply it in real situations on the job and to make it much more application-based than content-based. And so that's what we do.
Thank you. To you, sir.
So it's just a very quick one, actually. You mentioned Captivate, I think, before on a PowerPoint deck. Did you mean Articulate? It's just...
Articulate's a different product.
But is that... Because I know...
It's a similar thing.
Because Captivate records screen simulations, I think, as opposed to...
That's one of the things it does. You can also import PowerPoint presentations into it.
Okay, thanks.
Anything very quickly, because we're running very short of time. Anything coming up? Okay, well, first of all, I'm going to say, remember, both David and Harvey will be staying behind after the presentation, so if there's anything you'd like to take offline with them, please do so. But on your behalf, I'd like to say thank you very much to Harvey and to David for excellent presentations this morning. Thank you.